Hey everyone, Adrian here. Welcome back to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today, I'm joined by GS Youngblood. GS, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure, Adrian. Let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you prefer GS or Gregory or Greg or what's your thing? I should
GS
have
is
asked
fine.
before we got on in.
GS is fine.
Yeah, too easy. All right. So, I'd love to talk about a lot of things. Hey, like there's so much of your work which I really like about masculinity and relationships and things like that. So, I think that, like, from what I know, I want everyone to go and do some research. I'll obviously put some links in the podcast and let everyone know where to find you and things like that.
hmm
But I'm very
hmm
curious though, GS, like to understand a bit more about your background, because you're a coach, you're an author, got a couple of books out, and it's all about masculinity in a relationship and things like that. But what did you do before coaching and writing books?
Yeah, I spent 20 years in Silicon Valley, and I was in pretty mainstream high-tech jobs and marketing and sales and product management and things like that. And what I found was just, it was when I got divorced, actually. There's something kind of shifted in me where starting at that point, I got incrementally less interested in technology and trying to sell technology,
Mm-hmm.
and more interested in the interpersonal. The divorce was a seminal event in my life, I would say, maybe not in the way that I would prefer, but it did till the soil and pushed me in a new direction of where my interests lie. And so over time, I just really grew more and more distant and less enthused and interested in the Silicon Valley work. And more in writing the book, The Masculine in Relationship, which I started many years ago, and which then morphed into coaching. So it was a very natural transition for me. And it was many years back I was able to finally leave that life, that professional life, permanently, and do the writing and the coaching permanently. Um, yeah.
That's awesome. What was Silicon Valley like?
My first 10 years were very intense. I worked for a company called Broadcom, which was just off the charts intense. And it was a lot of moving very fast. And at the same time, I was raising three kids. And so between, work and kids, it didn't leave a lot of time for personal growth. It didn't leave a lot of time for me to really create the kind of connection in my marriage that is necessary, I now
Mhm.
know. Um, but even if I'd had the time, I wouldn't have known what to do. And that's the situation I find a lot of my clients in. Their wife will say, "I don't feel any emotional connection to you," and the guy will just say, "I really don't have any idea what that means. I just got off the phone with a guy earlier today about a workshop that he might go to, and he said the same thing. I don't know what she means when she says she doesn't feel emotionally connected."
Mhm.
Um, that's part of what I'm helping guys do, and we'll get into the book and the masculine blueprint. But one piece of that is building emotional connection with your woman.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a disconnect, but do you find that, like, I'm not quite sure. How old are you?
52.
Oh, wow, you look great. I'm 45. So I think, like, in that there's a period in life, and I've heard Wayne Dyer talk to this, and he kind of mentions like the morning and the afternoon and the evening of your life, and the kind of, you're at this sort of acquisition phase, and then you're at this accumulation and
hmm
climbing the corporate ladder and all that kind of stuff, and then you get into the afternoon of your life, and then you start to sort of wind up and look at life a little bit differently. I'm butchering all of that, but that's kind of the tone of how he talks to it. And I
hmm
feel like when you are younger, particularly if you're younger and you're working and you've got three kids, like I'm the same, I've got three kids, and I know you mentioned off air like one of your children are coming over to Australia, which is great. So there's I think there's a large part of you that just wants to, you're on a mission. You want to get out there and achieve and be successful. And you've got this value of family. A lot of what I talk to in coaching is a alignment in values, or an incongruence in terms of what you
Yeah.
value and how you embody that in your life. And so someone might say, my highest values are my kids and my wife and my family. And then I say, yeah, but the very thing that you're doing to provide for them is taking you away from your family. So therefore you are in conflict
Yeah.
with values. But did you find that in your life, in terms of you just on a mission, you're in Silicon Valley, it's high vibe, like the whole thing's like very fast paced, and you would just be like killing it, wouldn't you? Like crushing it in that space of, or that period of time.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was exactly what was going on for me. I was, like I said, I was at a hard charging company at the beginning of the marriage, and I really gave it my all. And I was sort of carried along by the excitement of the company and how fast it was growing. I would say to her things like, I'm working on $100 million deal at work, and you're pissed off that I haven't hung the picture. I kind of had that indignancy. And yes, there needs to be a balance between the time that you put into providing, because you do need to be a provider and a strong one. But the problem that a lot of guys have is you over-identify with the provider, and they say, I provide for this family. What more do you want from me? And she says, well, I want your presence. I want to feel connected to you. I want you to receive my emotions. I want to know what's going on inside of you. I want to feel your leadership, not just at work, but I want to feel your leadership applied to the home environment, to our emotional life together, to our sexual life together. Like, where is your leadership? You take it all to work and you bring nothing home. So guys, I can say this to all guys listening, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble when you over-identify with the provider and you say something like, I provide such a good life for you. What do you want from me? Well, I just rattled off the list of the things that she wants from you. And it's not enough just to be a provider.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we should play on both sides, though. I think there's probably a lot of frustration that I experienced and have experienced through clients. Like I hear that from the women, from my female clients and things like that, in terms of just not being able to bridge the gap between that connectedness. Interestingly enough, though, I just go back to values. So I just go like, what does that mean to you? Or how would you define that? And a lot of times they don't know. So men don't get the direction that they need in order to understand where you're coming from, which is a whole dynamic in itself. But I also think that from a man's perspective, there's probably a part of most men that fit that kind of I'm providing, what more do you want, is that they go to work and they get accolades, or they get respect, and they get like admiration, and people do as they're told, so to speak. So they give orders and it gets done, and then they come home and that disappears. I used to say, I go to work and I'm this person, this director or CEO of a company, and then I come home, but that disappears. And so now I'm treading on Lego and picking up after little kids and changing nappies and do this and do that, and I didn't have enough time to do X, Y, and Z. And so you got to fill in the gap for everything else that needs to be done. And all of a sudden, you almost feel like a part of you just died, because you're like, well, I get all this respect at work, and now I'm just like, I'm taking out rubbish. Like, what the fuck? So like I think there's probably an emotional resistance to all of that. Do you find that?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like, why do I need to do that? I'm taking care of my provider role, and you get that common disagreement of, like, he feels like he's working all day and then he's exhausted and he comes home and he feels like he's done his part. And she thinks he's off at some vacation now at work. And, it's like, this is the danger of having kids. This goes beyond just the masculine feminine dynamic in a one-to-one relationship, and has to fold in, child rearing, which changes the dynamics of things a lot. And it's a hard dynamic. And we have to go back to first principles. Okay, having kids is hard. There's no changing that. So what are you doing as the leader of the family or of the couple to actually lead the two of you into a better space? And that might be bringing some structure to the roles that you'll play. It might be setting expectations, or communicating better, or dedicating some of your resources to a cleaning lady so that it takes off the load. Like, what is the leadership you're providing to solve this problem, which is often an intractable one? There's never enough time and energy to go around when you have multiple little kids. So that's part of life. You need to accept it. Like we said earlier, it is what it is. Now, what are you doing as the leader to make this thing better? And that's really where I put a lot of pressure on the guys to lead in these situations.
Yeah, for sure. I think what I like about the way that you write and speak and things like that, it's a very manly way to think. Like, it's very like paint by numbers, steps, those sorts of things, which is really, really good. It's very solutions based to a lot of things as well. And I'm not saying that it's devoid of any kind of connection and feeling and emotion and getting into your body, which is super important. But I feel that is probably the biggest disconnect, or maybe you disagree, in terms of men not knowing what to do and women not having the ability to articulate in a way that's like you said before, I don't know what else you want, or I don't know what you mean by not feeling connected, because I do all of these things. So men have got this kind of like, very structured brain or way of thinking in terms of I want to solve problems, and women have got this very beautiful flow and almost sometimes chaotic and disastrous a way of like circling to a point, so to speak.
Yeah absolutely. I think it starts with the fact that I have been through everything that I write about. I don't read other teachers and try to pawn it off as my knowledge. I don't go to workshops and then try to regurgitate what I've learned. I've for better for worse, man, I've lived through everything that I write about, and I know it intimately because I've been in long-term relationship for a long time. And so it was important to me to speak in a way and write in a way that people understand, because anytime you go a little too airy-fairy or too spiritual or too vague, the guys are like, well, that sounds great, but I don't know how to do it. So it was very important for me. It was a value in writing the books to make it so that it was not, I never say paint by numbers, but it is a little bit of step by step. Here's what you need to do, and here's here's what you need to do, and here's what's going on her side. So at least you understand what's going on there. And I think between the two, I have gotten that feedback that my work feels very accessible, as compared to some of the other resources that are out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Where do you think, like, have you ever thought to the degree that you go, if I could articulate where things broke down in my marriage and in hindsight where that all started, do you have an idea, or have you ever articulated in such a way that's like, I can pinpoint the moment that it all went wrong? Or do you feel like it just continues to go back to how you were raised, the people that you modeled off, what was your dad like, how did you view your parents' relationship? Does it always sort of revert to that, or do you feel that it's different from case to case? Maybe someone had a circumstance or a different event or some sort of catalyst in their life that changed them personally in order for them to have a different view on the world. What do you think?
Well, you asked me a few questions. One was, is there kind of a moment in time where it turned? It's not a moment in time, but what I will say is that when you start to have kids, it exposes the rocks underneath the surface. It's like when the tide goes away, you're like, shit, all these rocks here. It's a good thing we didn't bring the boat up. So kids can do that because it takes the excess out of the system, and then you go into a scarcity mode of time and attention and energy. But what I will say is that the dynamics at play within you that cause the dysfunction in your relationship have usually been there since childhood. And I don't think there's a divine puppet master up there kind of orchestrating what happens in the world. But I will say somehow it works out that you end up with the person that is going to require you to work through your shit from childhood in order to be with that person. It never seems to fail. And I don't know the mechanism as to why that happens, but I know it does. So the person you're with is probably challenging you in a way that you need to grow. And if you can see it like that, it can help change your woe is me attitude about how tough your marriage is or how mean your wife is or anything like that. And then, once you get beyond that, then you can start to say, okay, what can I do instead of blaming her? Well, she probably has her issues too and her childhood wounding, but that's not your concern. Your concern is you. And that's what I always do is I put the pressure on the men, So I think that the dysfunction within ourselves has been there all along, and then doing things like having kids really exposes it, like I said before.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that you don't lean on other people in terms of getting advice or take their work and make it your own. But at the same time, I would have to guess at least that through your divorce and your separation and going through all of that, you would have had to at some point address all of that. Is that something that you just stumbled upon and sort of figured it out on your own, or did you did you do plant medicine? Did you do meditation? Like, how did you kind of like unravel those parts that you needed to kind of
it started with me. Oh gosh, how did it start? I was getting divorced and I saw an advertisement or something for this thing called the Authentic Man Program. It was this group here in San Francisco that did a lot of authentic relating. And there was a guy named Decker Kunoff who I studied with probably for about 5 years. I really did a lot of stuff with him. And man, through him, I really actually discovered that I had emotions and that I had a rich inner life that I could actually give words to. And I learned so much in that bubble with he and the other teachers there for about 5 years. And then at some point, my therapist gave me David Deda's book. And David is kind of the godfather of all this masculine, feminine stuff. And a lot of guys got their start through David's book because it's so iconic. And that's where I really had my eyes opened as to this masculine, feminine dynamic. And then I've studied with various people, both in that David Deda world and as well outside of that. So I had the training for the last 15 years with some of the really masters in these different fields of relating and spirituality and trauma and masculine, feminine. And at the same time, for the last 12 or so years, I've been in relationship with this amazing woman who she got a strong masculine from her father. She got a strong feminine from her mother. And I've been in this amazing relationship where my way of being the impact of my way of being gets reflected back very clearly to me. So, when I'm my biggest self and I'm the man that I want to be, and I'm embodying the qualities that I write about in the Masculine Blueprint, when I'm the connection between us flowers. It opens, it flows. She's in her full feminine and sexy as hell. And when I play small, when I'm not present, if I'm not transparent, if I'm not tending to the connection, if I'm not leading, it's not like it has to be that 24/7, but when it kind of gets chronic, when I'm not doing that, and maybe I drift because I get distracted with work, then she starts to close, and that fun, flowy, feminine state starts to, get really hardened. And so I've had this laboratory of a woman that reflects my way of being back to me. And it's been a beautiful relationship. Obviously, I've been in it so long, and it was my way to live this stuff rather than just talk about it. So I feel very, very fortunate to be in a relationship like that, where she sees me, she sees right through me, and as a result, I grow a lot and have a heck of a lot of fun along the way.
That's awesome. What cracked you the most? Like I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, and you describe yourself as someone who really didn't feel into their emotions at all. You were kind of like very straight up and down, and maybe just park things to the side and squash it all away and things like that. Was there ever a moment where your heart got completely cracked in between, like post your divorce, or those sorts of things? Or did your woman that you're with now, did she do that?
No, it actually predates her. Oh gosh, I wasn't divorced yet, but it was in a terminal glide path. And I did my first workshop with this guy I told you about, Decker. And I still remember it. It was moment one of the whole thing. I mean, it was the first exercise we were doing. He said, "Does anybody want to get some attention right out of the gate?" And I was in such an acute crisis. I was like, me, of course. Mm-hmm. I was in tears in 10 minutes, and just burst open. And because the guy saw right into me, that was his gift. And that's I can distinctly remember that moment as if it were just last week. And that really started me off on a path of looking inside myself instead of outside, because, I had 2 engineering degrees and an MBA, when I was working in the corporate world. And so of course I was super analytical, and I wasn't feeling, my whole life I had trained to be more and more analytical about things. Well, that was not helping me in the relational space. And I think this is what guys discover. The talents and skills that help you in the working world and be a good leader and excel and advance, they don't necessarily work very well in the relational space. And so this is what I'm trying to teach guys, these relational skills. And so what I always talk about is that I'm teaching relational masculinity, which is it's the quality of being grounded within yourself and in your own power, and at the same time relational in the space between you and other. And that's a rare combination for men to embody. And it's the nirvana of what our women want. They want to feel our power and our direction, our clarity, and they want us to be relational about it. It's not a big ask. It's just not easy to have both skill sets.
Yeah, it's a dance. Totally agree with you. I think that there's a lot of it that's ebbs and flows, and it's your ability to kind of switch on and switch off, and delineate through the whole maze of things. And like you said, you go off track, and that just happens. It's a part of life. It's interesting you say, like, you're in Silicon Valley, you're an analytical guy, you're working stuff, you're doing $100 million deals. If I can share a story about myself, my own personal experience, I found that I was the opposite. I found I was way more emotional, way into feeling more, way into being overcome by emotions. I used to read books about people weathering all storms, and it'd be like, you carry your weather with you and all this kind of jazz, and your environment shouldn't affect you, and you should just be able to, sort things out. And I really, really struggled. If my environment was toxic, I died a natural death. Like, it just really affected me internally. So when I went through my separation, I found I was so emotional. Like, I've never fucking cried as much in my life on a daily basis, just pouring out in terms of being a blubbering mess. And I feel that over the last 3 years that has evolved into a lot less of that overflowing emotion, if that makes sense, like that overwhelming kind of spillover, which was either a blubbering mess or a violent, angry, rageful person, right? So it kind of like flew between one side to the other. So I was either chucking shit around and kicking shit and breaking stuff and all the rest of it and swearing, or I was just sobbing. So but I feel now I'm kind of really poised and really centered and very together as much as possible, like, in terms of how I kind of flow through life. Does that make sense to you?
Makes perfect sense. And the path that you traveled, there's two ways to do it. One is I feel a lot, and so I'm going to shut it down and like clench. And of course, we don't want to do that because it squirts out whether we like it or not. And then there's the other path of, learning to be with intensity. Because I think that's where we get rageful or we get blubbering mess, is because we kind of contain it for a while and then we let it out. And there's a backlog and it overwhelms us. We're not able to sit with intensity. And that's the training we have to do, and it's through the embodiment exercises that I teach. The training we have to do is learn to be with the intensity of our emotions, of our anxiety and fear, and all of these things. And it sounds like a little bit of maybe the path you were on. You acclimated to the intensity, so you're able to be more present and choiceful and intentional in the face of that intensity, rather than it sort of overwhelming us, and when then we're just acting out of Pavlovian reactivity.
Yeah, totally.
So this is some of the training I take guys through in my life workshops in particular, which is a lot of embodiment practice to be with intensity.
Yeah, embodiment is such a critical thing. I think getting to know yourself and living congruently with that before taking on someone else in terms of like becoming an addition to your life. I kind of say to people that, you're already whole and complete as you are. And once you discover that within yourself and you start to love yourself as that person and embody the light and the dark. So that was something that I really had to appreciate, was there was some really dark sides of me that I needed to face and be almost comfortable with, and then there are parts of me that are really bright and shine quite well, but it's also just the ebbs and flows. But inviting someone who's an addition or a complementary to my life rather than a supplementation as to you complete me, that whole sort of Jerry Maguire type of notion, so before we get into the masculine blueprint, which I'd love to really iron out, there's a thought process that I've been going through for quite some time, and that is that we have this kind of trajectory of the feminist kind of movement that has been ongoing for decades, probably a century, I would say. So there's that sort of movement. Then I noticed probably back in around 2010, maybe a bit sooner than that there was this drive towards the feminine being more masculine, basically, like the whole like domineering, and not so much domineering, but killing it in the workplace and, individual, earning your own cash, like all that kind of stuff. And they're all wonderful things, by the way. Like it's, nothing that I'm sort of poo-pooing or anything like that. But then we kind of had this shift in this masculine feminine dynamic, because the men at that point were we had this, I'm not sure if you had this in the US, but in Australia, you called like a SNAG. It's an acronym for sensitive new age guy. Right. And so you kind of have, you're feeling into all this, and you're connected with your woman and all that kind of stuff. But then men kind of lost their way, because I feel they were either more feminized and women become more masculine in that sense. So there was this imbalance that had been playing out for a while. But there's an interesting thing, Jess, that I've noticed lately, probably in the last 12 months, is there seems to be this vibe going on where, particularly I see it in younger men and some older men. There's some well-known people online that are promoting this whole like stoic type of embodiment, and the women are being depicted as like it's greater for them to be the perfect 1950s housewife, and it's greater for the man to be this stoic, non-feeling, parks all his emotions and get shit done kind of guy. But it's almost like they are posing the same disconnect and divide and hatred towards women who are go-getters as women kind of did to men in that respect. Am I making sense to you so far? Like, do you see where I'm going?
I get all that, but give me a question out of that, because that was a lot.
Yeah, right. So, well, my question is, like, do you find that within your coaching? Are you noticing the same things as what I am? And if you do, can we speak to that in terms of how that may be affecting in a negative way the relationships? Because underneath all of that, and this is such a long-winded question, is I feel the desire that you mentioned before that women want, and the desire that men want, is almost been unchangeable to a large degree. So it's almost like the underlying desire and needs that needed to be met from both sides haven't changed, but there's an external or a social sort of influence that is altering our behavior as such.
Yeah. It's let's just be clear up front. This is an opt-in game. And what I mean by that is a lot of what you and I are talking about, and most of what I'm talking about, this is for couples where the man wants to be, actually, let me rephrase that, where one person wants to be in the masculine pole and the other person wants to be in the feminine pole. And I'll also go further and say that just for my own pronoun simplicity, I just say the man wants to be in his masculine, female wants to be in her feminine.
Yeah.
And I also am very clear. You can apply these permutations however the hell you want, whatever gender, whatever sexual orientation, doesn't matter. One person in the masculine pole, one person in the feminine pole. I use he for the masculine because I don't want to have to state 14 pronouns. So I just say that. And it's those people have opted in to wanting to be in those poles. So let's just say that everything we're talking about, it's not this person should do this. You're supposed to be like this. Everybody, you do what you want. Now, for the people where the man wants to be in the masculine pole and the female wants to be more at times in the feminine pole, that's the work that I'm doing and trying to help them do that, particularly on the guy's side. But you're right. There's this when the pendulum swings, it swings hard. And the couple of the ways it swung is like you said. We went from, domineering 1950s men to swinging into snags, these sensitive new age guys, as you call it. And then then it swung back, and then you get the Andrew Tates of the world who are like, they're kind of toxic. And then, you also have the pendulum swing and you get like stoicism, and everything's going to be stoic. And of course it's taken to the extreme. All these things are extreme. Anytime you have one extreme over here, you will evoke the other extreme on the other side. So, I'm trying to teach men, no, you don't need to swing all the way over here and become the nice guy. What you need to do is live this blueprint that I think we should jump into pretty soon here, because that'll, And just live there. Don't worry about the Andrew Tates, because that's something different that's born out of fear. Don't worry about the Stoics. That's also something different, born out of a desire to continue not to feel. There are all of these social things. Don't worry about that. In my worldview that I'm offering to the world, live the blueprint. Live the blueprint. It doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. You could be with a feminist. You could be with a 1950s housewife. It doesn't matter. Live the blueprint.
All right. Well, let's go
And I
into
think
the
that's
blueprint.
the message.
Yeah, I love it. It's a nice
Yeah.
segue. So can you
Yeah.
explain the blueprint and maybe even give a bit of context as to, obviously the premise behind it all, and
Yeah.
how we can sort of embody that as well.
Yeah, I'll start with the premise. There's this defining what masculinity is has been almost impossible. Some people will say that it's 1950s, some people say it's Andrew Tate, some people say it's the Stoics, some people say it's the sensitive New Age guy. I don't happen to think it's any of those. But absent all these definitions that other people put out there, often extreme definitions, I wanted to give something that really made sense to guys. It was easy to understand. It was not easy to implement, but it was straightforward to start on that path, and was somewhat systematic. And that is what the masculine blueprint is. This is my model of what I think masculinity is in the modern world. So we have to account for that. Masculinity is not taking us back to the 1950s. It's about living in the modern world and still being powerful within yourself. And I believe the blueprint offers that, both as a guide, but also as a diagnostic. Like, how much am I living in my masculine? And you can ask yourself some very simple questions. There's 3 elements to the blueprint. Element one is respond versus react. And this is the quality of a man he's got a groundedness about him, and his nervous system is grounded. There's a stillness to him. And there's a choicefulness to how he lives his life. Moment to moment, you can see that he's choosing, not just reacting or trying to please or playing out a script or a habit, but he's actually very present, choosing from moment to moment, which starts with a grounded nervous system. So that's respond versus react. Element number 2 is provide structure. And this is the quality of clarity, both internally and knowing what you want or knowing what the moment calls for, as well as externally expressing that. It's about having a directional energy to you. And you're somebody that creates order and direction and progress out of chaos. So that's element 2, which is respond versus react. And you can bring that directional energy into all the different parts of your life. You can bring it into your logistical life. You can bring it into your emotional life. You can bring it into your sexual life. I teach a lot about sexual leadership, and it seems like guys always like to talk about that. So that's a pretty popular topic. So that's element 2. Element 3 is create safety. And I'm telling you guys, the biggest determinant of how open and loving and nurturing and all those good things, how much of all those your woman is pretty largely dependent on how much trust and safety she feels with you, about you, and around you. And so the ways that we make them not feel safe is we deny or try to talk them out of their emotions by getting defensive, for instance, telling them they're wrong, not receiving their pain, not building an emotional connection with her. That makes the feminine feel very unsafe. So there's just so many things that you can do to either build or destroy the level of trust, safety, and connection in your relationship. And so a lot of what I teach guys is how to build emotional connection. You'll be amazed at how much goodness flows from establishing a good emotional connection with your woman. So that's element 3, which is create safety. So I'll pause for a second here because I talked a lot, but that's the blueprint in a nutshell.
Got it. What do you find guys struggle with? The connection thing, or just like, is it all 3 in all 3 of the above?
Well, each guy has their own flavor. I think that it really varies. Not everybody is falling short on all 3. But none of my clients are crushing it on all 3.
Sure. I wouldn't be seeing otherwise.
Yeah. They're usually falling short on at least 2 of them, is what I found. Yeah. And there's kind of 2 camps of guys. It's sort of like pleaser nice guys, and then there's kind of stoics. Like they're not wimps or pushovers, but they're not really able to feel emotional connection. So they think they're a good man, and their wife is just dying on the vine because there's no emotional connection. So those are, if I had to really simplify it, those are the 2 kind of types of guys that float into my orbit.
Yeah, right. And so when we talk to the connection side of things, so a lot of what I try to convey to my male clients, and is to kind of feel into their bodies. And it could be something very simple, but it's just starting off very basic to get a little bit more grounded and kind of understand the dance of emotions. And I'd love for you to talk to that, because there's obviously some practical tips, and I want people to go and get your book. It's on my list of things to do as well. So can we talk to that a little bit in terms of practical solutions? Because I know a lot of women will be listening to this going, I'm going to contact this guy, I'm going to get GS to fix my man. And then, but there's a lot of men that would be listening to this as well, saying, just throw me a bone. Like, let me know, what does that look like in terms of me embodying those sorts of things to get a little bit more grounded and stable within my own feeling and the body.
Yeah. Well, the way to get embodied and the way to be less reactive is to do embodiment practice. Okay. Part of the problem that men suffer from, I mean, I think everybody does, but we're just talking about men here, is our attention, our awareness is often on our thinking mind and our very analytical mind. And, you know, our half of our brain is experiencing the world directly. The other half wants to step in and kind of synthesize this into an informational architecture. And that's the problem, is our compensatory mind, or our mind and its compensatory strategies, really trips us up. And that's like, for instance, if your woman comes at you with some emotional complaint, like she's really upset about X, Y, or Z, and you start to try to talk her out of feeling that way by trying to correct her facts, that's her making an emotional expression and you coming back with an informational response. And so there's, you guys aren't going to be connecting and talking, and it's not even talking about the same language when you do that. But see, that's her being in her emotional body, and you coming in at the informational, because you think if you can just fix the bits and the bytes and the information about it, that you can solve this. And that is simply not the case. It's just it rarely ever works.
Can we touch on the bedroom a little bit? I think that it'd be really good to get your take on where you find the common struggles with, because you must get feedback from women as well. Like you must get people sliding into your DMs, women, and sort of asking what can they do, or maybe even men saying like, what can I do better in this domain? I think obviously there's again this external influence of pornography and things like that, which depict a certain type of lovemaking. And I think well, it's not lovemaking, but sex and the act of sex and things like that. But there's also this kind of like ebbs and flows of I guess a more darker side, something that may seem a little less vanilla, but it seems to be creeping up a lot in the coaching space, and particularly from women and things like that as well. Can we talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, this is a topic I talk about a lot. It's dark sexual energy. How can you bring more of it into the bedroom? And I've got a few posts on Instagram around dark energy, because I did a workshop earlier this year. Dark energy is that it's the energy of command and directionality, but also one of care and protection, and with a little bit of mischievous thrown in. If you take all five of those energies and mix them together, you bring that's dark energy. And dark energy is it's a little bit more dangerous. It's a little less of the light and loving, and more of the like, I'm going to take you. Now, here's the thing we got to be careful of. Dark energy by itself can turn into bad things like misogyny or sexual misconduct or sexual assault. And that's not what we're after here. And then if you take the light energies are great, loving, caring, nurturing, but by itself, it feels a little wimpy. If that's the only flavor that you ever bring, at some point, it's going to occur as a little wimpy. What the feminine wants, and of course, I can't speak for every woman, I'm just saying the feminine is both the dark and the light. And so you really got to have the dark governed by the light. So it's got to be like, that little playful snarl that says you're mine, governed by and I love you and I will protect you. And that's if you can learn to embody both of those and bring those into the bedroom, like you're an unbeatable lover, and you will be uniquely attractive to your woman until the day you die, because you're bringing that unique combination of dark and light. Now, the The light energy is usually a little easier for guys. There's a lot of nice guys out there. Dark energy is hard for most, and it really is an energetic experience. And so this is I'm giving a workshop in mid-March down in Sayulita, Mexico. And we're going to work a lot. We're going to work live, obviously. I'm bringing in a couple of just badass, beautiful, sharp women to work with the guys in some of the exercises so they can kind of practice bringing it in the face of the fierce feminine and the sexy feminine as well. And so it's some of the most fun work that I do is walking guys through that and helping them develop this energetics of dark energy. It's not technique, it's the energy of it and how much you embodiment. And that's a lot of the work that I do.
Do you find that it's also just some of the parts as well? I think like if someone was listening to this, a man and just tonight said to his lady, I'm going to take you, she might go, fuck, what the hell is going on? Because it's been vanilla for whatever, however long we've been married for, right? Or together.
Yeah.
And I think if you take that element out of it, it can come across like very disingenuous as well. Like you're trying to put on a mask of someone who you actually aren't. And
yeah,
I can speak from experience of this because this is a large part of my life was that and not knowing how to express. But then there's also it's only some of the parts. Like there's a lead up to it, and there's a kind of simmer that you kind of have to put on into, not have to, but it's obviously the best to practice the lead up, and it could be the text messages, and it could be the little innuendos, and it could be the pinch on the bum, and it could be like a lot of little things that kind of lead up to, because men are kind of designed that just it's ready and here we go, and then women are very much a slow burn, and it kind of like does build into a crescendo.
I think in addition to the things that you mentioned as examples of the lead up, the biggest one is, have you created trust, safety, and connection with her? Like a woman who has trust, safety, and connection is barring other factors, is infinitely more open to her partner sexually than where she's had a history with you of emotional unsafety, like you constantly are defensive and denying her reality. She's probably not that open sexually to you, vanilla or dark, either one. And the other thing that I would add is you have to give her a track record of you bringing a leadership that she wants to follow. And if you've been kind of passive in the bedroom and then all of a sudden you show up like Christian Grey, it's not going to go over very well, because she's learned to have to lead herself in the bedroom. So there's a lot of bricks or a lot of bricks to be built in what's my analogy here? There's a lot of foundation to be built before you get to the house of dark sexuality that you also want to build within your relationship.
Yeah. And also, like, you just reminded me, a lot of what I love about your work is that I think there's a lot of mystery that's been injected into a lot of this relational work. And it's kind of like you have to figure it out as the guy. And I get that you're putting the responsibility on the man to sort his shit out, because like you just need to come to the party and all of that. But I think in my personal experience, just being open without fear of judgment and vulnerability and all those sorts of things, and having conversations that lead into like, what about this and what about that, and like give me the user's manual, so at least I can kind of get a sense of where I can, is it a bit too hot or a bit too cold, or how can I sort of adjust the dynamics of this whole relationship. And when it goes vice versa, it's kind of juicy and fun and exciting. And from a masculine, like from the man's perspective, it's very entertaining and very rewarding. It's enriching even. And I think obviously that flows both ways, but I like how you kind of say you don't have to have it figured out. And it's not a bad thing to kind of go, how do you like it? Like, let's talk this out. Let's even as we practice.
So what you talked about was, can guys just get a little signal as to what's working and what's not? And like, what if you as a man could learn to take feedback about how you're touching her without collapsing? Because that's the problem. If a girl says, "Oh, I don't like that," a lot of guys collapse and they're like, "Well, okay, well, I'm not going to try that again. I'm never going to do," And then they just sort of shut down. So it starts with you. If you're asking for feedback in a loving way, it's got to start with you. You got to be robust and receive that feedback. So that's what I always tell guys is, first learn to receive feedback that you might not be doing it the right way. And she might be dissatisfied. Instead of collapsing, try different things. If she doesn't like that, try something else, or ask her like, oh, did I get you with my tooth on your clit? Like, tell me what I just did. Or do you like this? Do you like how that feels? And, checking in occasionally and asking her if she's liking something you're doing. If she's not giving you a signal, like, that's actually a really healthy way to handle the situation. So, there's so much that guys can do to create more of that feedback loop of expressions of pleasure or just informational, like, does that feel good? You can bring that into your relationship and create that kind of dynamic between the two of you.
Yeah, I love that, because from a man's perspective, it allows you to be open and vulnerable without fear of shame and guilt, because being rejected is the last thing that anyone wants, particularly a man in the bedroom, right?
Right.
From the female's perspective, they already have, most of the time, something that's going on inside of them in terms of their body and performance and those sorts of things as well. But the whole sort of lying back and thinking of England and just waiting for it to be over is like a not something that is conducive to a happy, harmonious relationship and growth within that side of it. I feel like this seems to be the side of relationships that really comes unstuck for men and for women, and the desire is so there. So they're just frustrated that they can never meet in the middle. But I feel that, that connection in terms of just open dialogue and how does this feel, and like you said, being able to receive the criticism in a constructive way. Obviously, being able to deliver it in a constructive way is super critical too, right?
Absolutely. Like, that's actually, instead of tolerating something she's doing you don't actually like. Yeah. Like, oh, no, I don't like that, but I do like when you ... like you can really open the communication channels up. And I just think it boils down to this, Adrian. So much more is possible. This is the message I have for men. In your despair, I want you to know so much more is possible in relationship with the woman that you're with. It's not always about going and finding an easier woman. I just did an Instagram post on this, and a lot of my clients, they're just like, oh man, I need an easier woman. And I'm like, well, maybe you should start bringing it. Maybe you should start living the blueprint a lot more, and then come back to me and tell me if you think you need an easier woman, because I would posit that you can evoke that easier woman in your woman. You just got to live the blueprint.
Yeah, look, I'm glad you brought that up. You must have been picking up on what I'm putting down on, because I've been thinking about that question coming up for the last sort of 5 minutes or so. It's an interesting notion, and I would say that like in wrapping this up, it's kind of, I think the most important part of what I take from you, Jess, is that if you bring the best version of yourself that you want to convey to the world and in your relationship, in this sense, and that is not met on the other side with the type of response that you want, well then, and there's no openness or no willingness for growth and for change and for molding each other in a certain way that can be conducive to a happy, juicy, there's so much more to this type of relationship. Let's explore the heights of this. I think that's also your message. But the first part is on you. The first part is on you to bring your best version of yourself. And then you can say, you know what, maybe we're just misaligned. Obviously that was the case for you. It's the case for me. And so perhaps we're just misaligned. And that portion of my life is the learning, the lessons. And like you said, I don't know why it is, but that's kind of how it unfolded. And now I can take all of that learning and apply it to, everything else going forward.
Yeah. What I would say to that is it's actually very hard to tell the difference between a woman who's mean and crazy. I'll just say that. I'm kind of caricaturing what a lot of guys will say. And a woman who is suffering from the lack of connection and lack of your leadership and lack of your groundedness. It's very hard to tell the difference between those two. So to just think that it's mean and crazy and to be like, well, be off with you, woman. Like maybe it's no big deal. If you have no ties to each other, great, just walk out. But if you've got kids, you damn sure better make sure that it's not this one, or it's actually some of your way of being combining with her wounding. No, there's no question about it. She's got her part. But if it really starts with you evoking some of that kind of harder behavior in her, and you're not owning that, and you're going to leave the marriage or let her leave the marriage and let the kids suffer the impact of that for the rest of their life, that's selfish and it's weak. So I say to guys, and I think this is what we're both saying, is like, again, live the blueprint. If you really think you want to walk out of your marriage, live the blueprint for 6 months and then see what happens. If at that point it's still just shit and you really have been bringing it, well, maybe it's time to consider there's something different out there for you that would be better, but only once you've tried.
I totally agree. Yeah. One final question. Do you think you will ever get, or do you get into couples? Do you think you and your woman would get into kind of couples relationships, or take it a bit further? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah. Well, let me talk about everything that's coming up. So I just sold out of my first masculine in relationship boot camp. It's going to be 10 or 12. I can't remember if it's 10 or 12 guys that we have. And I'm going to take them through an 8-week program. So I'm really excited about that. In March, I've got my live workshop down in Sayulita, Mexico. So March 15th through 17th. And then the new boot camp will open up in April of the program I just sold out. And then second half is when we do get into, as you said, my partner and I are going to get into some couples coaching. And she's one of the most badass coaches I've ever met. So it's great. It's always great to partner with her because a lot of stuff is generated. And anybody that's interested, you can see her on my Instagram. She's the blonde woman that I talked to on a few of the posts. But we'll probably do that in the second half of 2024, maybe towards the latter part, and start to really fire that up.
That's awesome. Just make sure you send me all of that information too, so I can pop this on the podcast. Hey, mate, I just wanted to say thank you for agreeing to this. A lot of what I love about people like you is that you're busy, hardworking men and women, and you take time out of your day to be on a show like this. And I think that it's really commendable, and it's something that I want to thank you for and honor you for, because you could be doing anything right now. And I think that, offering this information is great. It sends a message to the world about what you're doing, but also to me, the type of character you are. So I wanted to say thanks. I really love this conversation. I thought it was great. And I'm hoping that maybe we can circle back sometime in the future, because there's a lot more that we could explore from here on out.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on and helping me spread the word.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. Okay, buddy. Until next time, I'll talk to you soon.